Welcome to Chatting the Pictures. My name is Cara Finnegan, and I'm a writer, teacher, and historian of photography.
And I'm Michael Shaw. I'm a writer, a psychologist, and also publisher of Reading the Pictures.
Joe Biden's choice of a running mate proved historic, and the treatment of Kamala Harris's selection on the New York Times front page seemed to match the moment.
This is a scan of the New York Times front page above the fold on August 12, 2020, the day after Kamala Harris was selected as Joe Biden's running mate. The photo was originally taken by Daniel Acker for the Times at a political town hall in Iowa back in October 2019.
Starting with the image, this photograph is such a great example of the power of a good political portrait. The photographer shot her from below, which puts her in a position of strength and respect. We're looking up to her literally. And, behind her is nothing but blue sky. It's an optimistic image. It's also really striking to me because it features just Harris alone. Typically, we would expect to see and have in the past seen images of the big announcement of the vice presidential candidate, and it's the two people together, and it's almost like they're a couple, whether it's two men or a man and a woman. And here, because of the nature of the pandemic, we don't have that. And that, to me, giving Harris her space in the moment, in the context of the history-making choice of the first woman of color in the vice presidential slot, that's, I think, a really compelling thing to notice as well.
One thing I always do when it involves a New York Times front page is look at what Lori Novak of NYU has written about it, because she has been archiving front pages for decades. On her Instagram feed, she compares this to the cover of the New York Times the morning after Geraldine Ferraro was named the first woman vice presidential nominee, and the photo has the same width, but less than half the height. And as you were saying, Cara, she's also shown in that pairing with Walter Mondale.
In the context of Harris as a former presidential candidate herself, which would be a contrast from Ferraro and others, Sarah Palin, for example, I think that choice to picture her by herself is not only a pragmatic choice, because we had the very unexciting Zoom photograph, right, of Biden on the Zoom call saying, hey, do you want to be my vice president? Picturing her alone, I think, also is a way to recognize her power as someone who was viewed as a viable presidential candidate. The rollout of her campaign, when she first announced, she had the biggest announcement rally. There was a lot of energy around her. And while that faded away over time and she pulled out of the race, this kind of an image puts her in a place different from the stereotypical number two vice presidential slot.
The scale and the verticality does speak also to Harris being the first African-American woman and the first person of Indian descent to be named a vice presidential candidate in the United States. Not only historic, but it deserves this kind of treatment in terms of diversity and people rising.
There's a reason we're talking about this photograph in the context of the front page of the New York Times. The headlines and the text help us understand how the newspaper of record, at least, is interpreting this moment. And when I first saw this front page, I was sort of giggling a little bit at the two headlines on either side of Harris's portrait. One reads, "Political Warrior, Shaped by Life in Two Worlds." And then the one on the other side reads, "Pick seen as safe, but energizing." And they just seemed kind of so delightfully contradictory, almost so contradictory as to be kind of ultimately meaningless. And in the context of thinking about gender and the role that gender plays in the way that we interpret women politicians' abilities to be rising stars, what that means in a gendered sense, what would it mean to call a woman who identifies as a Black woman a warrior? What does it mean to consider somebody safe but energizing? There's a lot of kind of the buzzwords that float around candidates and that are floating around Harris. And she seems sort of steady in the middle of it all. And the kind of half smile on her face suggests to me that she's like, yeah, bring it on. I've heard everybody describe me in every which way.